Hello, friends. Lee Seacamp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Lara Love Hardin, discussing her beautiful, I think, one of the most courageous and beautiful memoirs I've ever read, called The Many Lives of Mama Love. You'll see it's a remarkable story, and it's a remarkable story that is full of incredibly helpful wisdom and insight into our human condition and insight of what it means to be in community with one another and the great need we have of being in community and communion with one another. Enjoy. Here's Lara Love Hardin. Lara Love Hardin, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to have you on the show. I read your book on a long international flight last week. And I think it's one of the most courageous books I've ever read, and it's deeply moving, and I thank you for it. It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
So your story in many ways, it seems to me, gets framed up as someone who's wanting to be a perfect suburban mother, and things go terribly wrong. But how would you kind of describe, for those who don't know your story, how you go from that striving to be a perfect suburban mother to finding yourself in jail?
Yeah, well, I think addiction doesn't care where you live or how perfect a mom you are. I became addicted to opiates before the opiate crisis was a crisis. So in the mid-90s, certainly where I lived in Northern California, opiates were handed out in sample packs. There was bowls at the doctor's office, blister packs, try a free sample, and it was Vicodin. And anytime you had an earache, you had anything, you were childbirth, I was prescribed Vicodin. And the way the opiates work in my brain, it kind of lit me up. And I grew up in a family with addiction, alcoholism, and I tried to out-educate myself from that. I swore I would never be like my family. And I moved 3,000 miles away from my family, and I went to college, and I got a master's degree. I was the first one in my family to go to college. And I was determined to have a perfect family just because I grew up thinking everybody else had a normal family except for me, which we know is wrong. But so I was really committed to being the mom I didn't have, and to having the perfect marriage. And when that started to fall apart was the first time I took a pill for emotional pain, not physical pain. So I like to say I was a late bloomer to addiction and then an overachiever, right? So I tend to overachieve in whatever I do for good or bad, right? That's just how it goes. So, I remember taking that first pill for emotional pain, and suddenly I could pretend everything was okay. And sometimes perfect suburban mom life means you're pretending everything is okay when it isn't. And that's certainly what it was for me. When that marriage fell apart, I was kind of off and on. Like I knew that an addict was not who I was. And I also knew that the feeling I got when I took a prescribed pain medication was one where I thought I was smarter, funnier, more connected to people, more joyful, more able to be excited about folding laundry and playing army guys with my toddlers and pretending my marriage was okay when it wasn't. And it helped me do that. And I remember one time I took 3 in one day, and I thought, oh no, this is a problem for emotional pain. I had nothing physically wrong with me. And I thought, oh no, this is a problem. I don't want to do this. It's not who I am. And I told my husband at the time, and his response, again, this is like way we were late 90s now. His response was, everybody does it. It's no big deal. But he took them. I go, here, take them, throw them away. And he put them up in the top of the linen closet. He's very tall, like way high up. And I clocked where he put them, and I was like, okay, that's out of my life. And then it was maybe a week later, I dragged a chair over, and I climbed up, and I got him down. And by the time that addiction had reached its sort of peak, the opiate addiction, that 3 that I took that day, it turned into 60 a day.
Wow.
Which is 20 for breakfast, 20 for lunch, 20 for dinner. And it was on and off for years because I knew this is not who I was. but I couldn't, it's so hard to explain the compulsion of addiction to someone who's never experienced it, because it is a compulsion. Um, it's it's so sneaky because it feels like you will die if you don't take that. So fast forward many years later, I had 6 years where I wasn't taking any drugs or anything, and I relapsed because my second husband had brought drugs in the house, and this time I started smoking heroin. And something, again, I swear I would never do. My brother died of a heroin overdose. I had a sister who died of a drunk driving accident. And I remember driving to my kids' private school where I was volunteering to do an activity during the day. And I'd found this heroin in my house. I had to call someone and be like, what is this? What is this sticky black substance that I'd found that my husband had brought in the house? And I was at the stoplight, and I was Googling how to smoke heroin on my way to the private school. And from that moment to the moment of my arrest, where I completely blew up my life, lost my business, everything fell apart, was only 11 months.
Wow.
And the book really starts at the moment of my arrest. And, describing the desperation in those 11 months is something I tried to do in the book, briefly, but it's really hard for people to reconcile. Like, I loved my children. I had 4 boys. The oldest was a junior in high school. The youngest was about to turn 4. And I would have thrown myself in front of a train, a bus, a car to save their life, to save anyone's children's life. But I couldn't stop the drugs because I loved them. And that's so hard to reconcile for people who've never experienced. Certainly was hard to reconcile for myself. And so, I was arrested in my suburban cul-de-sac where people don't get arrested. And my youngest son was the only one home. The other 3 older boys, and I had 2 stepchildren also, they were all in their school. And that moment was really the end. I remember the police pounding on the door, and just not to gloss over how the police ended up at my house in that 11 months. I stopped running my business. I stopped making money. I stopped paying bills. Everything was going to, food and drugs, and food for the kids and drugs for me and my husband at the time. And ran out of money. I started, my kids were in private school, taking, when my friends would go in to school to drop their kids off, I would open up their car door and pull money or a credit card out of their wallet. And I knew right from wrong. I knew, like, stealing from people I cared about and my neighbors was not who I was. But I kept saying, if I just, do this today, tomorrow I'll stop and figure out, I'll fix this tomorrow. I'll fix this tomorrow. And then when the police showed up at my house, I had no more tomorrows to fix it. And my youngest son was home. And I think that was the moment. A part of me was relieved that I was being stopped. And then the sheriff's deputies wouldn't let me call someone to come get him. And I was crying and begging them, please let me call someone. And they called Child Protective Services. And so, 2 strangers came to the house in a black sedan to take my son out. And, he had never spent a night away from me. He was at that stranger danger age. And so my hands are handcuffed behind my back, and I'm telling him, it's okay. These people are friends. You're going to be okay. I didn't know where he was going or where they were. I didn't know what was happening, but I couldn't comfort him. He ran to me for me to pick him up and hold him, and my hands were handcuffed behind my back. And I think that's the moment that was the end of everything, and then also kind of the beginning of everything. And, I got taken to the local jail, and the whole time I'm crying and asking about my son, where's he being taken? And then walking into that jail, the sheriff's deputy, we're sort of in this no man's land between the outside and the inside, this whole hallway. And he grabbed my arm very tightly and he said, you will never see your son again. And you should not be anyone's mother. And I 100% believed him in that moment.
Thank you. A lot I want to explore there, but before we talk about some of your experience incarcerated. Going back to just the dynamic and the powerlessness of addiction, how do you try to explain the experience of powerlessness to people who don't understand it or who have not experienced it?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the best way I can explain it is it literally feels like you're not choosing between, am I going to do drugs today or not? Am I going to live today or die today? It really, which is complicated because it's a really, what I was doing every day was killing myself, but just really ineffectively, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was very slow, painful, miserable self-destruction every single day on that cycle of finding more and getting more and using more to fix all the mess you've made because you're finding more and using more and getting more. So it is this sort of hamster wheel of misery. Like it was never a party. It was never like, oh, this is a fun thing to do recreationally. It really felt like I needed it to live, like I needed it to breathe air. I needed to breathe air. I don't know how else to explain it. There was no rational, logical, and I'm a pretty rational, logical person. There was no, I knew right from wrong. I knew what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do and who I was and who I wasn't, and I couldn't stop.
Yeah. That reminds me.
It's a desperation that is, thankfully I've not been in for 16 years, and I don't ever want to go back into, and I would never wish it on anyone, but there's 48 million people in this country addicted to opiates. And, another 150 million who love them. So it's not a rare thing. It's just a thing we don't talk about enough. And we don't have, I think, enough stories about people getting to the other side of it.
That reminds me of a lecture I heard once by a physician who was himself a recovering addict and had done a lot of research around the science of addiction. And in this lecture, he's saying, he said, the way I would like to explain powerlessness is, he said that if you consider someone who's drowning and with the rational part of their brain, they're under the water and they know that if they breathe, that it will kill them, but their brainstem takes over and forces them to breathe and it kills them. And he said, but the brainstem is more powerful and it takes over and it makes you do the thing that's going to kill you. And he said, that's what happens in an addiction, is that wiring gets turned in such that you think whatever the substance is or whatever the behavior is, that you have to have it and that you're going to die if you don't have it. And then there you are, powerless yet again. And I found that just to be such a provocative, helpful kind of image of what seems to be going on there in that kind of mechanism. I think that the one scene that filled me with such anxiety in your storytelling about the powerlessness was when you get out on bail and you need to stay clean when you're out on bail before you're going to then be tried, and you can't do it. But I don't know. How do you remember that experience?
Yeah, I remember that experience honestly is the darkest time. And those stories of being out on bail were not in my original book proposal. I had told anyone that. My agent didn't know. My editor at Simon Schuster didn't know that story. But when in nonfiction, this is a little inside baseball, but if people are interested in books, like nonfiction books are typically sold from a book proposal. You haven't written the book yet. So my book was sold off a proposal and sold to Simon Schuster. And then I had a year to write the book. And so I went away for 2 months to write the draft of the book, away from family, away from work, away from friends, away from, I went out of the country, I went across the globe where there was, I was on a completely different time zone. Because I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm only going to do it if I'm going to be really honest, like really honest, not pretend razzle dazzle with words honest, because I can do that too, but really honest. And part of that was writing that darkest chapter. I can't remember the chapter title now, but originally, because I originally had written a lot more chapters that were smaller, and then I had to, in the editing process, Simon Schuster had me combine chapters. But the darkest chapter originally was called Nordstrom's return policy, which I thought was like, which I thought was funny. But yeah, I had to, I had a period of clean time in the November, just, 2.5 months that I'd been in jail before I got out on bail. Again, this is all pre-sentencing and all of that. But when I got out, I had those 2.5 months clean, which was an accomplishment because, people might, I saw more drugs in jail than I've ever seen in my life. And, I went to UC Santa Cruz for college, right? So and so I was really proud of myself, but I had no coping skills, right? So when I got out and my husband was not on the same path, we were co-defendants at that point. He was arrested at the same time. And he was bailed out before me. And so when he presented drugs to me, I had no skills to resist at that point. I had no emotional skills. I had no mindset skills like I would have now. If someone put drugs in front of me now, it wouldn't be an issue. But back then I had nothing. And so it was really easy going through the hardest time in my life and so much uncertainty because I didn't know if I was going to prison for 30 years or not. I didn't know if I'd see my children again or not, which seems logically like a really good reason to not do drugs at all because so much is at risk, but I didn't have anything else to fall back on.
Yeah.
And I was isolated. I really think the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And I'm sure there's a scientist who will say that better, but, and there's been studies, like the rat park study, where they give rats this, cocaine in water or something. I'm going to someone Google up the rat park study. Yeah. People can do that. But basically they're giving rats this sort of 2 water bottles. One has cocaine in the water and one doesn't. And so they just start drinking the cocaine water and, are basically dying. And then they do the same experiment, but they make this magical rat playground. They put other rats in there. They, have like a magical environment and still have the 2 water bottles, but the rats don't do the cocaine water when
That's
they're in this sort of community, right? Again, I'm sure I bungled that.
We'll check it. We'll check it out. Yeah,
check it out.
That's beautiful. So then, of course, another major cord running throughout your narrative is the power of shame and the trauma of shame, and the neighbor from hell headline being prominent here. So, would you tell that story and kind of how some of that plays out?
Yeah. So one of the things when I was first brought into jail and the deputy said to me that I shouldn't be anyone's mother, and I believed him, like I had so much shame and I really believed in redemption arcs. I always have, right? I was, I've been a writer my whole life. I believe in a good redemption story arc, but I didn't think I deserved one. I thought those were reserved for people who were good. Fundamentally, and I believed that I was fundamentally bad and not worthy of that. And so shame, you go to jail and every identity you have is gone, right? You're just a number. And you're in a place that is dehumanizing and stigmatizing. And I was brought into, going into Child Protective Services court in handcuffs when you can't hold the papers, trying to say, no, I was actually a good mom is really, there's a big disconnect there, right? So when I was sentenced, the next day, my face was on the front page of the paper calling me the neighbor from hell. And for the record, I'm an excellent neighbor now. But it was humiliating. And it was not only humiliating for me, it was humiliating for my children. My son Ty was in junior high. And after I got out of jail, he was like, Mom, that paper, he told me years later, actually, he said, every single classroom I went in, that paper was on the teacher's desk. Was your face.
My. Oh, wow.
I don't think public humiliation leads to rehabilitation for anyone, but I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. I believed everything negative thing. But really what happened from that is someone again, this is 2009, beginning of 2009. Someone anonymously printed out and mailed me all the online comments to that headline, hundreds of them. And it was, a big manila envelope came to jail, because otherwise I would never have seen them, right? There's no computer access. I saw the headline because one of the guards put the paper in and showed me the morning it came out, and I was mortified. But I read those online comments, and they were hateful and hurtful. And some of them I could tell the usernames were people I knew, and it was threatening, and it was said every kind of horrible thing about me. And I read them over and over again, and I carried them around, those comments about me, for years, like literally and figuratively. And every horrible thing that was said about me, it just sort of wired into my brain, and I believed it because I was thinking horrible things about me. I'd imploded my life, yes, but my children's life, my community, people, I had not one friend that I had in 40 years come visit me. And I wouldn't have wanted them to visit me because I didn't think I deserved a friend. Looking back, and again, it's always easy in the rearview mirror, but I was probably the worst on myself. Yes, there are judgy people in the world, but I was judging myself hard. I was unforgiving. But yeah, shame, it's so sticky, and it sticks with you. And it, 16 years later, it can still pop out certain times. Like I was just on an airplane, and someone asked me what I did, and I wrote a book. What's your book about? And I was like, oh boy, you're stuck on an airplane next to me. Do you want to know? Like, is this going to scare you? Hi, I was a neighbor from hell. Like, nice to sit next to you for 5 hours, but that's shame popping up. You think you're like, I own my story. I'm not, like, that's part of my story. It's not the whole story. Like, I can do all that stuff, but then in practice, now I notice it when it pops up, but it pops up.
Yeah. It strikes me as fascinating that your shame that you narrate so powerfully, that's not just something that happens to you after you're being arrested, but in many ways, as you point back numerous times through the book to your decline and the way in which, because you have this sort of quest to be the perfect suburban mom, you can't let other people you can't show other people your struggle, which I would presume is also related to shame, right?
Yeah, I was very committed to the idea that everyone in the world both like me and think I had everything all together, right? And when you are working so hard to be the perfect mom, the last thing I could do, I don't want to say you because there's people who can do this, the last thing I could do at that time was ever ask for help, right? I get asked a lot of times, if you go back to anything different, like, I had people who would have helped me. I was not brave enough to ask for help. I could not get out of my own self-regard enough to ask for help. And the irony is, I remember thinking at the time, because I knew I didn't want to do drugs, but I also knew I couldn't stop. And I remember thinking at the time, there is no way I could ever go to rehab for 30 days and be away from my children for 30 days. That would be impossible. The world would fall apart. Because I'm the mom who holds it all together, which I was not holding it all together. But, and then the irony, of course, is I went to jail for a year.
Yeah. Do you, let me back up just a second. With what you said there just a moment ago, you at some point refer to addicts as deeply riddled with self-obsession. But we talk more about that?
Yeah. I think, I think it's this idea that everyone's thinking about me, talking about me. It's a very self-obsessed point of view when you're in the throes of addiction. Like, everything is about your survival. It's really hard to get out of your own. Obviously, it's hard to get out of your own self-regard and self-obsession and self-service, or else I could have stopped, right? Like, if I could, and And I think even in this sort of idea that everyone was invested in me being perfect, no one was thinking about me. Like it is a little bit. Everyone's thinking about themselves and the things they're ashamed of and the things they're hiding. Everybody's got secrets, right? Like since my book came out, I have on every messaging thing in the world, from my cell phone to LinkedIn to Instagram, everybody in the world tells me their secrets, their deepest, darkest secrets, which is a weird place to be in, right? And certainly I'm no therapist and should not be anyone's therapist, but what it has taught me even more is that everybody is carrying something. Mm. Everyone is hanging on to something they don't want other people to know about.
Yeah.
And nothing heals in isolation. Nothing.
Yeah.
It only heals in community. It heals when people are like, really? Me too.
Yeah.
Wait, you feel that way? So do I.
Yeah. So, when you think about that process of working through shame, you tell a number of stories of the way that shame comes up in social settings, beyond jail. But what are one or two of those that kind of stand out to you that are painful reminders of the way in which shame is this kind of socially propagated practice that often continues to wound us?
You mean post jail?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's I have a nonprofit that specifically helps incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women. So I'm going to just talk about women because that is sort of what I know and what I've experienced. It's it's the fastest growing incarcerated population, and 80% of women in jail are mothers of minor children. So,
wow.
There's already mom shame. We all have mom shame, and maybe there's dad shame too, but mom shame, I know, where it's like, oh, I actually didn't bake those cupcakes for the bake sale. I bought them and then pretended to bake them, or I'm not doing organic food, or I'm going to let you have all the screen time you want because I'm tired, all of those things.
Right. Yeah.
But being an incarcerated mom is shame on steroids. And so there was that alone. But even, after jail, I'd gotten my son back, he's in first grade, going to parent-teacher conferences. My face has been on the paper. I'm sure everyone recognizes me. Again, no one was thinking about me as much as I thought they were. Some people were, but not everyone. But I was so scared of people finding out. I spent a dozen years in shame where I was afraid people would Google me and see that paper. Huh. But I remember one back to school night, and this mom came up to me and said, my son Augie loves playing with your son Caden. We should do a play date, and I could bring Augie. You could take Augie home after school, or he could come to the house. And it was this moment where so much shame, because I'm like, if you knew that I just got out of jail a year ago, you probably wouldn't want your son to come play with me. But I can't tell you that, right? I'm not going to tell you that. I had a don't ask, don't tell. If you ask me about it, I'll tell you. But I can't tell you that. And my house is 400 square feet. I'm embarrassed by it, and also proud that I have one right now. And you might not want me in your house if you knew me, so I'm not going to bring Caden over and walk in your house. It's just this very isolating way. And, I lived in fear, working, not to jump ahead, but, I worked with really amazing, not judgmental people in the world for a dozen years before I talked about my past. And it was like I was building this resume of goodness. Right. So I was once called the neighbor from hell on the front page of the paper, but then Nelson Mandela thanked me in his last book. So I was building this resume to defend my humanity when the truth came out. Because I know the truth. It was two trains running parallel, right?
Yeah.
And me trying to be as good adjacent and do as good work in the world quietly, anonymously as possible, but keeping it all in my resume or in the acknowledgement sections of books.
Yeah.
So that when the truth came out and I was judged or I was called bad, I could prove I was good. I don't do that anymore. I don't think I need to defend my humanity or my goodness, but I lived that way for far too long, a dozen years of fear. It is, the best way to describe it is, when you're leaning back in a chair, right? Like kids do this all the time.
Right.
You're tipping back in a chair. I'm trying to show you, and I don't know if it's on video, but you're tipping back in a chair and you're leaning back. And there's that moment when you go too far and you're kind of in between. Am I going to catch myself and be able to put the chair back on the ground? Or am I going to fall crash into the floor? That moment of fear in between, when you don't know which way it's going to wobble the chair, that's what shame feels like. And I live that way every single day. And, you know, because it's hard, you know, think of the worst thing you've ever done. And everybody has the thing, you know, it's on a spectrum, but everyone has the worst thing they've ever done. Maybe they betrayed someone, maybe they lied, maybe they stole a paperclip at work, maybe they cut someone off, maybe they committed a real crime, you know, whatever it is. Like, if you think, what if whenever anyone thought of you, they only thought of that thing? What if any time anyone ever talked about you, no matter what you're doing in the world, they only talked about that thing? That's what it's like. That's what it's like getting out of jail. That's what it's like being formally incarcerated. That's what reentry is like. That's what trying to rebuild your life is like. And so that shame popped up a million times. Even 16 years later, it pops up, you know, like I said, on an airplane, but also, you know, I sold my house last year, which is great. I had a house to sell. I never thought I would own a house again, and I did. But all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm going to rent for a while. And then this idea of going through a property management company, oh my God, they're going to do a background check. Like, what if I can't rent? What if no one will rent to me? Doesn't matter how many New York Times bestsellers I have or how many lunches with Oprah I've had. That fear and that shame and that like fear, like, oh, you know, like I'm not going to be able to do this. This is a barrier that's still there.
Yeah.
So those kind of things pop up all the time, you know, and in that way, and I write this in the book, like every sentence, whether you're just arrested or in jail for the weekend or in prison for many years, every sentence is a life sentence. Because when you get out, it will affect you forever and potentially generations forever.
Yeah. So that's a helpful segue into me asking about your take, and you point to some of this in passing in the book, but your perception these days of the nature of the criminal justice system and you point to numerous ways in which it's broken, but what's kind of top of mind for you these days about the nature of that brokenness?
I mean, I think the systems, you know, like broken systems, everyone knows that, but it's like, what does that actually look like? I think the hardest thing about jail, which I certainly never knew, and I'm the first to admit I never cared about incarcerated women or men until I became one, right? Like it was nothing I spent a lot of time thinking about in my cul-de-sac or in my book clubs or whatever. But, you know, re-entry is a part of incarceration. Like, it's not like you're incarcerated, you get out and then, okay, you're done. You know, you followed the rules, you paid for your crimes and now go on with your life. Like, you are actually never done. And I think, you know, there's very real, very illogical barriers that we put to people who are trying to rebuild their lives post-incarceration. And it doesn't make sense, right? Like we say, okay, you're free, don't fail, but then everything is set up for failure, whether it's jobs, housing, you know, vocational licenses, childcare, benefits. Like there's all these punitive things that are in place in the system post-incarceration that ensure people go back. And sometimes you go back, oftentimes you're going back for a reason that has nothing to do with committing a crime or doing a drug again, you know? So there's a lot of dehumanization in incarceration. And there's a lot of illogical barriers post-incarceration. So, you know, and it's like we can't talk about recidivism rates without discussing why people go back, you know. And again, I knew nothing about this until I got out. I really thought like, okay, I'm done. La, la, la. I'll skip off to my future. And I just had no idea. And, it's been 16 years and I still have dreams. It used to be weekly. Now it's like maybe every few months that I'm going back to jail and I haven't done anything wrong. And I can't, it's like a mistake, and I think the system is really hard for everyone, the people who are running it, like no one's going into corrections or social work or public defenders or prosecutors without caring about people. Right. Like there's easier jobs to do. Right. And I have a lot of empathy for everybody in the system, from judges to correctional officers and to those incarcerated and locked up in the system when maybe they needed treatment. Maybe they, 100% of incarcerated women have histories of trauma. And they're in a system that is triggering and re-traumatizing every day, and I found a lot of humanity in jail with the women I was with. Like there was a lot of humanity with each other. We took care of each other. We helped each other. There wasn't a lot of humanity outside for us in there, but it's where I found a lot of it. There was more humanity in jail than in my cul-de-sac, to be fair.
You come across a copy of Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now in jail, and it seems like that's a significant turning moment for you.
Yeah. I mean, one of the gifts, and going to jail was a gift. It didn't feel like at the time or for many years after, but looking back now, it was a great gift. I mean, I think I became a better human from my experience. I had more empathy. I became a better writer, friend, mother, all the thing, worker. But, one of the things, there's 2 books really that saved my life. And, the first sentence of my book is reading was my first addiction. Books saved my life when I was a kid. It's what I escaped to. It's what I loved. When there was chaos in my household I grew up in, I would just read. And books saved my life again in jail. And 2 books in particular. The first was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And there was one sentence in that book that taught me how to quiet my mind, because I was spending all my time trying to rewrite the past, right? I was trying to, why didn't I ask for help? Why didn't I go left instead of right? Like we all do that. Why did I ever try that? Why did I ever get that prescription? Like all the things, right? And when I wasn't doing that, I was just having anxiety for the future. Like, who's going to hire me? How am I going to get my son back? This clock's ticking. What am I going to do? Where am I going to live? Who's going to be my friend? Like all of those things. And there was one sentence in that book where he said, to quiet your mind, you just think to yourself, I wonder what my next thought will be. And when you do it, everyone could try it. You think it in your head and you have no thought. Like it just stops. It's like a great
That's
little
fascinating.
hack.
I was just doing it just now. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And it works every time. And so the first time I did that, there was just like a millisecond of peace. And then I would do that and it would get longer and longer. And, jail's a great place to learn to meditate. There's easier ways. You could do a course online. Don't go to jail for this. But it helped me, and his book also was like talking about collective pain and trauma and, this thing of sending love and light to people. And so I would go to all my court dates and this prosecutor did not like me. And I would just be there and I'd be like, I'm present. I'm sending him love. I was just sending love and light, sending love and light. And he did not care for me at all. But it's helpful. I still, there's still some people I send some love and light to now and then today, because we all have hard days with people. But so that book saved me. And the other one was Mark Nepo's book.
I was so glad to see you say that one. I love that book. Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Oh, I love that book. And this idea about pain pushing until vision pulls was like transformative. Like if I ever get a word tattoo, that's what I will get. Because it was really this moment where I was like, wow, I've lived my whole life, 40 years of my life, letting pain push me. Everything I did was achieving, trying to fight for was because this pain was pushing me. And like, what if I let vision pull me? What if I'm in jail thinking, someday I'm going to write about this and make meaning out of it. Someday I'm going to speak to people. Someday I'm going to meet Oprah. Like whatever, I'm a big fan of delusional thinking. I've done it my whole life. but that's part of vision pulling, right? Like,
Yeah.
what if I just even if that vision is delusional, right? I'm going to let that pull me. And what's so amazing, so I read Mark Nepo's book, The Book of Awakening. It's like a daily affirmation reading, essay, meditation practice. He's such a wise writer. And so I read it like a horoscope because I had a date, and I can remember like reading it in June. And, I was going to get out till September, but reading it every day to see what's the message what's my Mark Nepo horoscope today. And then at the end of June, this is why I love true life, because if you were to write this in fiction, it would be unbelievable. So the end of June, I got invited to go teach a 3-day writing retreat at Omega Institute in upstate New York. And so I went to go teach that at this institute. And who is teaching there the same weekend? Mark Nepo.
Huh.
So he is there, this man who really changed my life, saved me 15 years ago. So he's there, and I get up onto the campus. It's this beautiful upstate New York campus in the woods. And the director's got me in a little golf cart. She drops me off at the cafe. And she drops me off right in front. There's a little cafe table, and Mark Nepo and another man are sitting there. And I recognize him right away. And my mouth drops open. I look at him, and he stands up and he goes, "Lara," like he had read my book.
Really?
And we ended up like as colleagues, right? You can't even make this up. Like his book saved me at my lowest. And we got to have every meal together that weekend and become friends. And I got to tell him how much his book had saved my life. And so it was like, one of those like full circle.
How beautiful.
Serendipitous moments. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was amazing.
So you earlier used the word skill, and you've used, I know that, I don't know how many times you do, but at least 3 times that I remember in the book, you use the word skill and the significance of lack of skill. And, when I think about my own trauma or my own powerlessness and my own seasons of great difficulty, that was one of the things that I discovered as well, is that I lacked certain basic life skills. And it was in learning new practices. And it was never a single magical, metaphorical pill. It was not one thing and then all of a sudden everything's good. But for me, it was like a lot of practices, right? It's a sowing, a watering, a weeding. But when you think about key skills or practices that then began to be crucial for you in learning to live well, what are ones that kind of immediately come to mind for you that have been important to you?
Yeah, obviously, like the ability to quiet my mind and meditate. I think just an awareness is a big one. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, look, that's shame. Oh, look, I'm creating a whole story out of this, and knowing my assumption that someone's mad at me is a trauma response, not real, things like that. But mostly, probably the biggest thing is having an emotional language now. So, what that, I grew up in a family where no one certainly talked about how they were feeling or emotions. No one even said like, how was your day today? Like, it just wasn't, I never had a language for emotions. My own emotions embarrassed me. And then I read this whole book, but that was sort of this thing, like, my emotional life is a burden to others, and it's embarrassing. And, and you never, here's the thing, you never know how much you change until it gets tested, right? So last year in 2024, like the subtitle of my book is a memoir of lying, stealing, writing, and healing. So I made this joke, I'm healed, right? But it's a process. It's a process. And so I think, in 2024, like January 1st, my dad died, and I had just landed in Key West, Florida. I'd never been there before. And this is a dad I didn't write about in the book. It's a new dad I got 8 years ago based on a DNA test. I got an entirely new family, which is a great gift as an adult. I didn't put it in the book because it was just so unbelievable, right? Like the whole, how it all happened. But I was alone in a place and I didn't know what to do. And the old me, when she didn't know what to do, would figure out what to do and just do it, right? But I called people. Like, I had community. I went through a hard thing for the first time in my life. I went through hard things, and it was a whole series of things. I went through a hard thing not alone, right? I let other people, now I have a feeling, I have an emotion, like I'm scared. I'll call 27 people and be like, I'm scared, like never would I do that in my life. But really it is about community and having people that I can be so messy with. I do not have to be my best self. Like, I can rage, I can vent, like in the beginning of January, within 3 weeks, I had death, divorce, and Oprah, right? 2 horrible things and a good thing, right? And sometimes it's even harder when it's like a great thing, right? Like, you're so discombobulated. Like, my dad died. My husband told me he was found someone else 10 days later. And then a week later, Oprah pops in and says, I've chosen your book. And I was like, what is happening 2024? Like, it was whiplash and chaotic. And for the first time in my life, I was okay. I was like, why am I going through all these hard things? Like, I used to take 20 pills to call the utility company to make a payment arrangement, like to get that courage, right? Just to make a phone call. And I was like, wow, I'm going through these hard things. And for a moment, I was like, wait, why am I okay? And it was because my automatic response coping skills was not to handle this alone, go inside, make it about me, internalize it. It was to gather close the people I trusted, where I could be my actual self with. Messy, raging, crying, laughing, ridiculous, serious, like whatever it is. Like, I have those people in my life beyond my children, right? Like, I have this community that I never had. And like I said earlier, like, everything gets better in community.
Yeah.
Everything is better shared.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably the greatest thing, is I don't go through anything alone. If anything, my friends are like, I don't need to hear every emotion you're having. I was like, I know, but what is this feeling? Like, it's some people learn that at 5, and I'm, in my 50s, like, what is this feeling I'm having, and talking about it. I don't know how I turned into such a talker.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm flashing back to a season of therapy I went through a lot of years ago now. But I remember in one of the first sessions, the therapist said, "What are you feeling?" And I just looked at him blankly and said, "I don't know." And he smiled and he said, "I think you're telling the truth." And that was just kind of transformative moment, right? Where you began to identify things that previously one has never identified. And it is a new way of being in the world.
And how great that I totally understand what you're saying, because I had that. I don't know how I'm feeling. I don't know. Am I happy, sad? Like there's some things I'll probably be like, I actually, and I'm sure thousands of people listening to you right now know exactly that feeling. And that just makes it better. Yeah. Right. That's why they invented those little charts where you could just point to an emoji face.
Yes.
Be like, this is my feeling. What is this one?
Yeah. Another recurring thing that I often hear as people share their stories, and a lot of kind of spiritual wisdom will point back to the notion that coming to healing or wholeness so often is a finding their way back to themselves. And finding their way back to some joy or some passion or something central to their identity. And that seems to be true in your story as well, in that there you are in jail, and one of the ways that you began to recover your sanity is through re-engaging with your writing. But what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. I mean, again, that's why I said it was a gift.
Yeah.
I was always a reader and a writer. I was a big reader as a kid, and then started writing in school, and I got a lot of attention for it. And I went to college, undergraduate, majored in creative writing, English and creative writing, and then went and got my master's degree, a master's of fine arts in fiction writing. This is all pre-jail, right? And then I stopped writing. I had, 3 little kids when for me, again, no offense to like the great drunken, drugged out male writers in the world, like Hemingway and Bukowski, like they can do drugs and write. To me, those two things don't coexist, because both are how I process pain. and make meaning out of the world, right? So when I started doing the opiates, I wasn't writing. And so I didn't write for 2 decades. You know, basically I was like, I have little kids. I got to pay the bills. You can't pay the bills with writing. You know, all the reasons to stop. Not realizing at the time that writing was how I like processed my interior world, how I made meaning of the life, how I made meaning of those emotions I had no language for. I have a great language through my fingers on a keyboard, but verbally I did not have them. In community, I didn't have them. So when I was arrested and was in jail, I started writing again. And I wasn't doing drugs, and I started writing again. And I started out, I learned to be a ghostwriter in jail, which is crazy, right? But, you know, I would listen to the women I was in there with, amazing women who all had stories. And in the system that's broken, there's no room for context or to hear people's story, right? And narrative is like the thing that changes the world, I think. But so I would listen to them, and then I write a letter to the judge as them, asking to be put in treatment, say, instead of sent to prison, or a pass to go to a funeral, or, you know, I would hear their stories and I'd write in their voice because I have a background in fiction writing, voice, and because of just, you know, sort of a childhood trauma response, I'm very good at assimilating with people, right? And being other people. And so I'm sure it was a crime, but it was a crime for good, right? Like, so I'd write letters to the judge and get this woman put it as them, sharing their story. And the thing that was so I was helping people, which felt good. But the thing that it really did for me is suddenly I felt, at a time when I felt like I had no value to the world. I was not a mom. I was not a wife. I was not a boss, employee, community member. I wasn't on the school board anymore. I wasn't coaching Little League. I felt like I had no value in the world and everyone had written me off. I felt valuable. I felt like I'm doing some good and I have a valuable skill, right? I'm being of value. And writing felt good. And I started writing, like I wrote a narrative poem. I'm not a poet. I'm a horrible poet, but about the women I was with and our experience. And I started writing a like young adult novel that I could send to my son in pages. And he was a writer. He was 13 at the time, one of my sons. He's still a writer. He's an amazing writer. Thinking we could work on that as a bridge to connection. So that was one of the great gifts of jail, as I got back to what my first love was and what I thought I was really good at and what I had, you know, gotten a lot of validation in the world for up until the time I stopped, right? I didn't know about ghostwriting and that I would later work at a literary agency and start ghostwriting for real, but that is really where I learned that skill. And to be a good collaborative writer, you need a lot of empathy. You have to be able to put yourself into the consciousness of another person and live their life and their choices through their eyes and their mind and their skill level and whatever it is. And that's why I love memoir as a, you know, as a media form, right? Because there's nothing else I know until like someone invents some kind of, you know, way to link up our brains. There's no other medium where you're in that close, you are the consciousness of another person. So if you're reading my book in the first person, you're making all my questionable life choices as me, with me. You're right alongside, right? That I voice, when you read, you don't get that from a movie. You get empathy, sympathy, you might relate, but that's why I love memoir. Like, because you are that person. Yeah. For good or for better or for worse. Right.
And so then you get out of jail and you begin finding your legs again and looking for jobs. And then you find your way remarkably into this work in a literary agency. And then before too long, you're like literally doing work for people like Desmond Tutu and then working on a joint project with Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. But you tell this beautiful story about going to be with Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama and the way this becomes a key moment for you in learning, I guess it's working with Desmond Tutu's book, your own self-forgiveness, and then with both of them, acceptance. But I don't know, either one of those stories or both of those in brief about the kind of way that changed your own life?
Yeah, it was amazing. The first book that I really was fully working on as a writer. I'd done a sort of partial help on a different book with a doctor, was a book of forgiving by Desmond Tutu and Empad Tutu. And, you know, he is the beacon of forgiveness in the world. He taught a country how to forgive. You know, he did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yeah.
Again, not a judgy person, neither is the Dalai Lama, but I was so in fear of people finding out my past. And so working on that book was both amazing, except for the chapter on self-forgiveness. I was like, I can't do that. I don't know how to forgive myself. And that book has all these exercises in it. And I actually went back into the jail and tested out the exercises that Empad Tutu had written for the book with the women in jail. And they loved that. They loved being part of it. So I got to share, like, hey, this is very new, very soon, just a few years after I'd gotten out of jail. And I got to go back and do these exercises with them. And every single woman in there had the same problem. Like, I can forgive someone else, but I can't forgive myself. And I don't think that's, specific to women, but I was in a women's jail doing it. But, doing that book, and being Desmond Tutu, like, looking back now, I can see, again, it's like you can see the patterns, but I can look at every book I worked on, whether I was, just part of the support team or I was an actual collaborative writer or editing them. And there's, dozens and dozens of books I've written 14 books, 12 is other people, one co-authored and one is myself, where I was in charge of writing the book. But I can see how every book helped me, like I can see, like, working with this neuroscientist and this neurosurgeon about neuroplasticity and really thinking about what are the messages I'm grooving into my brain every day. Even saying every day I'm an addict. Do I want to say that every day? Like, there's just, like, learning about neuroplasticity that helped me, learning about forgiveness that helped me both forgive other people and forgive myself. Going to India to work with the Dalai Lama, like, I was super, and Desmond Tutu on the Book of Joy, like, I didn't know joy and play. Like, that would come later, because when you're in survival mode, there's not a lot of time for playing and being joyful, right? Like, it wasn't when you're surviving. You're not like, oh, what creative thing can I do? There's so much untapped creativity in the prisons and jails across this country and the world, that and economic potential and all kinds of things. But again, when you're just in survival mode, you're not exploring your creativity, right? You're not like, oh, right. What do I have to offer that's creative and fun and all of that? So, working with, I've gotten to work with just amazing scientists and academics and thought leaders. And again, not judgy people in general, kind, wonderful, warm-hearted people. But I had so much shame. It was 12 years. It was 12 years before I, like, said out loud that I was once called the neighbor from hell, right? Or I let people know about my past. I just lived in so much fear of these non-judgy people judging me. And no one was judging me as much as I was judging myself. And there was the moment I did, like, a local TEDx talk, right? And I got on a stage and I said, the thing I was afraid of everybody finding out. I said, I was once called the neighbor from hell. And now let me tell you about some other people I've been. And the feeling I had after just telling a little bit of my story, and somehow I had this misguided belief that if people knew the truth about me, they would run screaming from the room. And the opposite happened. They ran closer when I told the truth, and wanted to connect more because I think I was safe to do that with. But the feeling I had after just saying the scary thing out loud, that I was so worried for over a decade that people would find out, that feeling I had was better than any drug. The feeling from any drug I've ever taken, like that lightness, that, like, oh, I can breathe. Like, I can just not worry about this. Like, that's really why I decided to do the book, because I wanted more of that feeling and this idea that this might help. My humiliating stories might help people. So let's do that.
Another one of the books that you wrote with co-wrote with Anthony Ray Hinton. That's another one of my favorite books, and we've had Mr. Hinton as a guest on our show. And what an incredible human being and incredible story. And again, you helped tell that so beautifully.
Yeah, he is one of my favorite humans in the world, and no offense to the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, but my greatest spiritual teacher is Anthony Ray Hinton, right? He taught me more about gratitude and letting go and joy than any book I've ever read or anything, because he was 30 years as an innocent man on Alabama's death row. And, we spent a lot of time together in Birmingham, Alabama. We had a lot of meals together, and he would say things to me like, I'm not going to have hatred for anyone. Like, why would I give the state of Alabama any more of my energy? Why would I be bitter? Like, why would I not choose joy and humor? And he walks 5 miles every day. And I was like, well, why are you walking in the rain? He's like, 'cause I can. Right. And he helped me so much, because there were times post jail when I would be in jail. I wanted nothing more than to be doing dishes in my own home for my own family, not for hundreds of jail inmates, right? I wanted to sweep my own floor. I wanted to make I wanted nothing more. And then years later, I would find myself in my own kitchen, in my own house, feeling grumpy about doing my dishes. And then I think of Anthony Ray Hinton and gratitude, and I remember the me that said, this is all I want, right? And so it was such a gratitude check.
Yes. So as we close, you alluded to this in talking about your TED Talk, but the title of your book, of your memoir, The Many Lives of Mama Love. What do you think, how has that, being able to acknowledge that we are all complicated, that you're complicated, that I'm complicated, why has that been so important to you, that we have this multiplicity about ourselves? How do you see that as beautiful?
I think it's a definition of freedom, allowing ourselves. I don't worry about being the perfect single anything anymore, right? I'm not the perfect mom. I'm not trying to be the perfect mom. And I think it's just acknowledging that we all have different stories going on through our lives, and we're all there's a great poem. I don't remember the name or the author, but it is this sort of ode to all the women you've been, and I think that's just part of accepting that we're not all the worst thing we've done or the worst season of our lives. I can be a college student and a cul-de-sac mom and an inmate and a felon and a best-selling author, and I could be all the things. And there's a fullness to that and a freedom in that that I think is a gift we give ourselves and the people we care about and strangers, right? Because everybody's got a story. There's just not time in some systems, not room to hear the stories, but everybody's got a story and a context for why they make the choices they make at any given time. And Mama Love, which obviously Love is my last name, but that nickname was given to me by the women I was incarcerated with. And so it was a great gift, right? Now I have people at book signings sitting on my lap and trying to Mama Love, everyone calls me Mama Love. And it's a gift and a reminder of where that nickname came from too, and I don't think, I do a lot of work with incarcerated women across the country, and I've visit a lot of jails and prisons and book clubs, and I don't want those women to be forgotten. That's kind of my mission now.
Been talking to Lara Love Hardin about her memoir, a New York Times bestseller entitled The Many Lives of Mama Love. Lara, thank you. It's again, beautiful book and a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.